energy improvements. So we'll look at making the case today, utility rebates in September, and then we're going to look at lending and investment stacking in October. But I do want to flag too quickly that, these topics are driven largely by feedback that we receive from the nonprofit community. So, keep the feedback coming. We do have a link on our website to be able to provide your ideas for what and your interests and what you really need. And that again informs the direction we take these and who we bring to the table to help kind of help provide resources and connect dots to these things for y'all too. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass it back to Anna to introduce our panel today.
Speakers today, if we could just have them go down the line and come off mute and share a little bit about their position and their role in their organization. We're going to start off with Coral Abbott from Invest in Our Future.
Hey everyone, happy to be here with you today. My name is Coral Abbott and I'm a program manager with Invest in Our Future. I'll share a little more in a minute, but we're a fund that was set up to support with implementation of federal clean energy programs. And I am focused on kind of the sphere of work related to helping community scale, community benefiting projects access resources from the IRA and other federal funding sources to implement clean energy goals.
Thank you, Coral. Next up, Heather Navarro from the Midwest Climate Collaborative.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm with the Midwest Climate Collaborative, and we are a multi-sector network covering 12 states in the middle of the country. We support organizations in higher ed, nonprofit, local, state government, businesses as well that are all working towards a carbon neutral, climate resilient, interconnected Midwest region. And my background before coming to this was in local government in the city of St. Louis. And before that, I directed a nonprofit with about 12 employees for 7 years working statewide in the state of Missouri. So happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much, Heather. And then we have Marlene Nagel and Aaron Carson, both from the Mid-America Regional Council. Marlene, if you want to go first.
Good afternoon. I'm Marlene Nagel. I'm Community Development Director for Mid-America Regional Council. We're the Association of Local Governments and Metropolitan Planning Organization serving the bi-state Kansas City area. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the recent Department of Energy grant and sort of how we have worked with foundations. Aaron?
Hello, my name is Aaron Carson. I'm the project manager working on the Renew America's nonprofits grant for MARC. My background's in architecture and construction with a little bit of focus on sustainability. So this is right up my alley. Forward to this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So excited to have you all here. With that, we'll get started and we can, thank you, Isaac. Start with Coral.
All right. Thanks again, everybody, for joining today. I'm Coral, like I said, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about, from my own perspective, some things to consider when approaching philanthropic funders about your climate and clean energy work. We could go to the next slide. So to give a little background on Invest in Our Future to start, Invest in Our Future launched in early 2023 following the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. The organization came together because a number of climate funders came together in the recognition that in order to meet the vision of the Inflation Reduction Act to decarbonize communities nationwide, philanthropy needed to play a role in helping to fill some of the gaps that government wasn't able to pay for. So many climate funders had been, and many still are, really importantly, focused on policy advocacy, but wanted Invest in Our Future to really specifically focus on implementation. So our focus isn't so much on making policy change, it's helping to achieve that bigger goal of the IRA to get clean energy investments into communities nationwide. We're set up as a time-limited pooled fund, which means that a few major foundations provided us with 3 years of funding to make grants that will help to accelerate implementation of federal clean energy programs through the IRA, the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Act, a lot of folks call that one, and the CHIPS and Science Act. Importantly, though, we know these federal resources are expected to launch climate action in communities nationwide, from the household scale up to those bigger utility projects that generate power for a whole region. But the IRA also provides a real opportunity for transformative change in communities, not just in terms of emission reductions, but also quality jobs and economic growth, energy bill savings, and air and water quality improvement in disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities. So key to achieving these additional benefits is making sure that transformation is inclusive. And so for that reason, we're focused on how our grant making can take an equity-centered approach so that the individuals and communities that have historically been shut out of opportunities and have been under or disinvested in are instead prioritized for these investments and job creation, wealth creation opportunities. The Justice 40 mandates provide a really excellent starting point to achieve this. And we're looking at ways we can maximize benefits to these communities through our work and support the broader climate funder field to think about things with the same framing as well. So to achieve this bigger goal of equitable implementation at scale, we focus our work on a few key areas. So the first one is technical assistance and capacity building. That is making sure that organizations that are eligible for federal funding have the resources and capacity they need to go after them. So typically this means that we'll fund third-party organizations that have the time and expertise to help groups apply for funding through helping with applications or creating useful guides and toolkits for applicants to use. But can also look like capacity building directly to organizations that are trying to advance their climate and energy work, or efforts to help build understanding and expertise in a specific sector or a specific community on how to advance climate-related work. Then we have strategic communications. So this is communications and organizing that helps people to learn about how the IRA is currently benefiting their community or how it could if they engage in efforts to help secure those funds locally. Then we have workforce development, so providing resources to organizations that can help to build a quality, stable, and equitable workforce, and importantly, a diverse workforce that includes the people in communities who have historically not had access to high-quality clean energy jobs. So that could be like funding apprenticeship training programs that provide wraparound services to make sure people have childcare and transportation available so they can attend. And then we have barriers to implementation. So reducing barriers to clean energy project deployment. This is mostly focused on permitting and siting. So kind of bigger scale work in communities to focus on those barriers. Notably, we don't ourselves fund physical infrastructure. This is in part because we were set up to help folks capture and implement federal funding for infrastructure and are trying to really fill the gaps that exist outside of those infrastructure costs. We are also kind of at a national level, so do less like project specific work, but from what I've seen, often the national philanthropies that provide funding for physical infrastructure do so through low interest loans out of their investment portfolio, which I'll get into a little bit in a minute. We go to the next slide. So I myself am new to philanthropy. I've been at Invest in Our Future for less than a year, and in that time I've learned a lot about the different types of funders that are out there. So this is a very quick high-level overview. It doesn't contain everything, and there are more resources online that you can find to walk through these in more depth, but wanted to share just a few maybe relevant points to get your wheels turning on the types of philanthropies you might want to engage depending on the work you're trying to advance and how to kind of make the case for how your work fits in with what they're trying to do and fund. So to start, just wanted to cover the difference between a foundation and like a general philanthropic organization. So a foundation is an organization that has an endowment or money that's invested and then generates a return. They then use a portion of that endowment. They have to use at least 5% every year for grant making, and then they invest the rest of their endowment typically. So a few types of foundations are community foundations, which, like the name suggests, are based in specific communities or regions and often hold stronger relationships with local groups and provide grants that will directly benefit that community in some way or another. They often also have a topical focus, but they're really focused on that community or region often. Family foundations are set up by a donor or a family and then are run by a combination of staff and then members of that family. Some of them focus explicitly on the communities where they're located. Others might do broader grant making that's focused on specific topics rather than a geography. And then corporate foundations are set up by corporations and also really vary widely in geographic and sector focus, but often have some sort of correlation to their corporation's focus. So a corporate foundation of, say, a healthcare provider might do a lot of grant making around public health efforts. Then there are groups that are philanthropic organizations, but not necessarily foundations. Pooled funds and regranters. So Invest in Our Future is both a pooled fund and a regranter. These organizations typically don't have an endowment of their own and rely on donations from other foundations or organizations to carry out their grant making and the other work that they do. So the main reason that I bring this up is that most people are aware that foundations make grants, but some foundations also have what they call an impact investing arm of their organization. Foundations invest some of their endowment into activities or work that creates a positive social impact. Some foundations have specific impact investment portfolios. So they might have like a climate impact investing portfolio, another an education impact investing portfolio. What's important to know about these is that they're offered as loans rather than as grants. The upside to them is that the loans are typically set at lower interest rates or structured in another way to make it more affordable and feasible to take on than a loan from a bank might be. From what I've seen, philanthropic organizations that don't have an endowment typically don't make impact investments and really just focus on grants. Another quick note is that there's a difference between public and private foundations. So public foundations have to provide a higher level of transparency about how their money is spent than private foundations often do. As far as the structure goes, philanthropies are typically driven by a strategy that's developed internally across their staff and board. Excuse me, that provides some framing for the type of grant making or investing that they'll do. So for example, the strategy determines whether they'll have a focus on climate, education, public health, whatever their other kind of topical areas are. And then within those categories, specific areas of focus as well that really drive how they make decisions about their grants or other investments. So, oh, sorry, can we go back really quickly? I think something else to note is that final decisions are often made by a board, which can include the donors themselves. And so when you're talking to a program officer, even if they seem really excited about your idea, they often have to run it by a few other levels and go through a formal voting process before they can actually let you know whether they can give you a grant. So when you're considering reaching out to funders, it's a good idea to do a little digging into how they're structured, whether they do grant making and impact investing, whether their focus is more national or global, or if they really focus on a specific region, and then what their strategy is, which they might have on their website, or you can reach out and ask. And so I think thinking about this can help you make sure you're reaching out to groups that align with the scope of work that you're trying to get funded, just to kind of save your own time. And then also to understand how to make the most compelling case about your work and understand how it aligns with their strategy. Okay, next slide. So before we move into the next presentation, I also wanted to just offer some of the broader ways that I've seen philanthropy supporting on clean energy implementation. This is definitely not comprehensive. It's just what I've observed in the last year or so. So on the grant making side, there are a lot of funders that are supporting organizations' operating capacity. So for example, funding a new staff person that can focus on a climate implementation program that the organization is launching. A lot of funding is also going to programmatic work. So workforce training programs, communications campaigns, or development of technical assistance resources are things that I've seen a lot in our corner of the world. And then on the impact investing side, this is more where I've seen some funding going towards infrastructure project costs or things like equity investments in clean energy companies that are trying to serve more communities and grow their organization. The last note that I'll make before turning it back over is that there are a lot of really skilled, knowledgeable organizations and collaboratives that can help smaller nonprofits to navigate and apply for these federal funds. And so really encourage folks to engage with them early on to help identify the best sources of funding for what you're trying to achieve. Because from what we've been seeing, and I know the other presenters will touch on this, there's a lot of funding available from the federal government for some of the same activities under different programs and in different forms. And so there are a lot of folks doing great work that can help you navigate how to access that as well and understand if that's the route you should be going instead of trying to approach philanthropy first, so that ultimately you can achieve your goals around getting these projects built out and this work launched. So with that, I will hand it back over to our hosts.
Thank you so much, Coral. I think that was a really great high-level overview. Next up, we'll hand it off to Heather from the Midwest Climate Collaborative.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Coral. That was a really wonderful overview. And I know this is such a huge topic and there's so much to cover. For the last year and a half or so, the Midwest Climate Collaborative has been working with nonprofits as well as local and state governments, colleges, universities to help match funding opportunities to climate priorities. And so I'm going to speak a little bit more from the applicant side of this. And it's nice to see a lot of the familiar folks here that we have been working with over the last year or so. And I just want to recognize that, fundraising is a journey. I know this, again, is a huge topic. And hopefully I can share something new and helpful here, no matter where you are in that journey and whether it's relevant to IRA or opportunities beyond that. So next slide. So, the Inflation Reduction Act is not called, actually the one right before that, if you can stick with that one. Thanks. So the Inflation Reduction Act is not called the Climate Funding Act for a reason. It's not limited to groups who are already thinking about lowering their emissions and building resiliency. It's really for work happening in all sectors of the economy and social services. So whether you deliver fresh produce in a food desert, you work in a school or an after-school program, you deliver healthcare, you teach music. I mean, it really is worth seeing how these federal funds can support your mission. Similarly, if you work in a building, you require transportation to deliver services or any other basic functions, around running an organization, you really should be looking at what's available at the IRA. Next, or with the IRA. And I won't go over this too much because Coral already went over some of these. Just, the support really comes in so many different forms. And I think a lot of us, especially in the nonprofit sector, are really focused on competitive grants. But there are also formula funds. These are usually distributed from the federal government to the state, and they're based on a calculation. You still have to apply in terms of having a program that meets the qualifications, but the amount has already been set aside and it's kind of like money on the table to go get. There are rebates, tax credits, which are now available to tax exempt entities in the form of direct or elective pay. Low interest, forgivable loans. There's these challenges and competitions that you might have heard about. This is usually you submit a project or something you've created or done or working on, and you win money. There's not necessarily a report at the end. So those are kind of interesting. And then there's also technical assistance, which can come in the form of consultants, which are paid for sometimes by a funder, or they can come in the form of vouchers to seek out your own technical assistance. And these can come from a variety of different sources. So on the right there, private foundations can have competitive grants. They also could help provide technical assistance. Obviously, your tax credits are going to come from the federal government. Your rebates are usually coming from utilities. but there's a lot out there beyond these competitive grants. Next slide. So I'm sure this next slide doesn't tell you anything you don't already know if you're working in the nonprofit sector. And we could spend a whole day just talking about, capacity gaps, I think. When we think of challenges or hurdles, if you don't know about a source of funding, you can't apply for it. So there's that, just keeping up to date. If you don't know what the IRA is, then you're missing out. And you've got a lack of capacity is a huge one. It takes time to understand the issues and the funder, to build relationships. Then there's the actual application. And then if you get the grant, there's often a post-award negotiation, pre-award negotiation, there's the management, there's the reporting. I mean, these are really full-time jobs to seek out and apply for grants. And that's often another full-time job to manage a grant. I currently, the Midwest Climate Collaborative is hosted at Washington University in St. Louis. And so being here on the university side, I can see that there is a reason that higher ed institutions, they have a negotiated indirect rate with the federal government because they know it takes a lot of work to do this well. And, those of us in nonprofits, who, are doing the work are not generally the ones who have the time or the experience to handle everything that it takes to apply for and implement a federal grant. And you don't necessarily want them to. You want those people to be doing their job, not the paperwork. So tremendous capacity gap. So I think really the question is, how do you navigate this world of funding to leverage what you have to get the most for your organization and your mission? And so that's what I want to talk a little bit more about. So next slide. So to get funding, there's a lot of things you need, but one, if you are at a nonprofit, you probably need board approval. You need the right partnerships because many of these funders, for good reason, want to see that you're working with others to pool resources and expand your reach. And you'll likely need some sort of technical assistance. If it is for an energy project, you may need engineering drawings. You may need to do a greenhouse gas inventory or, grant writing support. And all of these things, each one of these takes additional capacity. Communicating with your board is a time commitment in itself. It may require one-on-ones with specific board members. It could be additional meetings. You may need to be bringing in other voices with experience on a specific topic or researching and expressing to them how your mission is supported by a new source of funding. Partnerships require time for relationship building. Getting to know the organizations, the people in them, the people they serve. Striking up your first conversation with a potential partner while you have a federal grant application in your hand is generally not the right foot to start off on. You need to, build in that time up front. And then finding the right technical assistance, entering into a contract if necessary, takes time. Just digesting this, maybe getting additional feedback, relaying it back to your staff or your board, getting everybody's buy-in. All of these things take time when you're going to go after a new funder. And I just want to say, I get it. I hear you all. It's not an easy thing. I know these grants come out and it's like, hey, we have something that's been tailored just for you and your community. But it's much more than just filling out a few boxes. And so that's what I'm trying to demonstrate here, that at all of these legs, we know that there's additional capacity that's needed. So next slide. So in talking with your board or a funder, so you want to make the case that some of these funds, especially through the IRA, whether it's clean energy, climate resiliency, especially if these are not areas of funding that you've been in, you may really need to make the case to them. And so first, just starting off with, who's the audience? Is it your board? Is it a specific board member who's going to be most interested or most skeptical? That may be the person that you need to spend the most time talking to. Maybe you need to get your staff on board first. Or maybe it's a funder that doesn't usually fund organizations like yours and you want to show them how your missions align, in which case, your audience, and maybe a specific staff member there, it may be their board members, it may be one of their donors. So really get specific with who are you talking to, and in terms of crafting a compelling message. So, and then find out what's important to them. Find out over coffee if you can. Otherwise, look to the website, but also look at news releases, talk to other grantees. You often find out more, by word of mouth of what's important to this particular audience. And then who the right messenger is. If your board is the audience, Maybe they need to hear from you, but maybe they need to hear from the funder directly that you are the type of organization they want to fund. If you're thinking about a funder, maybe they need to hear from someone that they already have an established relationship with. Maybe it's another grantee or it's another funder in the same orbit. If it's community foundation, maybe they need to hear from other community foundations. It may be that they need to hear from an expert voice that can cite research to say that, yes, funding neighborhood organizations to work on home weatherization is a valuable way of improving indoor air quality. Find the folks who have the credibility to deliver the message to that specific audience. Unfortunately, having the facts and saying all the right things often isn't enough. You really have to have it come from the right person. So next slide. So this is an example, if you're talking about energy investments, and this might, again, maybe you're in the business of, running a food pantry. So think about kind of like a glossary of terms is what we've got here, like how you can equate energy investments to what your mission is. So like, for example, in homes that have been weatherized, that have switched to electric stoves, for example, or other electric appliances, they've installed programmable thermostats. Those residents report higher levels of safety and comfort. That's your message. You're talking about safety and comfort. When buildings are cooler at the end and start of the school year, students retain more knowledge and have improved learning outcomes. So that's what you're talking about. You're not going to your board or your funder talking about climate out of the gate or anything. You're talking about your mission. So when we make energy investments in our buildings, for example, or our clients' buildings and homes, they have more money to spend on healthy food, rent, recreation. And I think you can always come back to the argument, we have building repairs to make anyway, right? So why not use these funds and reap all of the co-benefits that come with them? Next slide. So you might get pushback, is this mission drift? We don't work on climate or energy, but really your mission is not changing. And if you hit next, I've got an example here. So let's say that your goal is to serve a certain number of children every year. You deliver books and healthy snacks to their home or their daycare. And you have a budget for this. That includes, a variety of things, including the books and food, but also vehicle maintenance and gas. So imagine if that piece of the pie went away or is drastically reduced, how much more you would have to deliver services or pay employees, for example. So this is just another way of making the case based on what your mission is. Next slide, please. And then this slide just makes some more connections depending on, what your mission is. I think it's really helpful to map out where you see those intersections for your audience, what matters to them. So, I've seen foundations that'll say, oh yeah, we support X. And then you're like, oh great, we do X. And then they come in and say, oh, well, actually we don't support that. So sometimes you need to help make the case, show those connections. And so, in this case, you're talking about indoor air quality. There's going to be an intersection when you're looking at these funds, energy efficiency upgrades, electric appliance replacements, maybe your organization works on disaster preparedness and you're looking at funds for energy storage, solar panels, resilience hubs. Like, there's going to be an intersection there. Economic development, if that is, I see we've got a lot of folks from like Main Street organizations. A lot of these grants have workforce development components, small business support. So, really identifying where those intersections are and then where you can find funding at that intersection. Let's see, next slide. So, thinking about too, who are the other partners? So thinking about, you think about the folks that you specifically directly work on with your particular mission, but you can really expand beyond that. Even if you're the only one in town who provides a particular service, you're going to need someone to help promote your service, even if that means in line at the grocery store. You're going to need someone potentially to service your vehicles or maintain your office space, to provide tools or equipment. When you're looking at some of these funding opportunities, they may feel really overwhelming, but recognizing that you have built-in partners in your community. And, thinking, I just put a list here of some of the ones that we don't always think about, but have come to me and said, hey, we want to be a partner. We may not be the lead, but we have things to offer. And that could be libraries. They do have campuses. If you're looking for a place maybe to pilot a project or to host a meeting, think about your libraries. I've had land trusts come to me and say, hey, we have land. We would love to be figuring out how we can put this to better use or to demonstrate certain practices. Schools, same thing. they have land, buildings, their students are often looking for projects, and on and on. Many of these partners, though, are also resource constrained. So, you might look at their website, and just because something's not on there, it doesn't mean they're not interested and they're not working on it. And so, if you do find somebody in another organization who has similar interests or is thinking in the same vein, I really encourage you just to set up a standing meeting, maybe once a month, just touch base on what's going on, because then when these opportunities arise, you're ready to go. You already know somebody, you've built a relationship, and you can hit the ground running. And also, think about the work that you have to do and what can be contracted out. So if you don't have the capacity for all of that financial reporting, for example, find a bigger organization who does. You could see if maybe there is a local college or university you could partner with. Definitely ask what their fees are, but there might be somebody who has experience in this area and has capacity to fill in some of these gaps. Also, is there someone else already creating maybe educational or promotional materials that you could work with? Is there someone who's already convening or hosting the people that you want to convene for your particular project? Work with them, meet them where they are. We don't all need to be spinning our wheels doing the same thing. And then there are organizations and there are funders. I've seen private funders, they'll provide a grant writer for their grantees to be able to apply for other sources of funding. So, don't be afraid to ask. You don't have to wait until you win the award to get funding. There is, application funding out there to help you prepare. So those are a few of the things that you can be doing to rely on other folks in your community to expand your capacity. Next slide, please. I'll just go through these super fast because I know we're running out of time, but these are just examples of places you can go to get ready-made graphics to talk to your audience. So these are from Climate Central. If you want to go to the next slide, it's EPA's Enviro Atlas and EJ Screen. And if you're not familiar with these tools, there may be, an intern that would love a project. I know a lot of the schools and universities have GIS programs and their students are looking for projects and for practical application. So these things are out here. They can tell really compelling stories to your audience. And then the next slide is the CGES tool, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening tool, which a lot of you have probably used before. Next slide. And I'll just focus a couple of quick examples, success stories. This is the New Northside Missionary Baptist Church in St. Louis. It serves a community facing poverty and all of those challenges that come along with it. And back in 2014, they decided to install solar panels using state incentives. And Reverend Burton here, he says the church saves thousands of dollars each year, and they serve as a demonstration to others about what's possible. And this is not a church that's in a high income area with lots of time to spend on, eco-friendly projects. He really saw the connection between the work he's doing and the high energy bills that his congregation was facing, and really figured out how to make this work. The next slide, thanks, is Williamsfield, Illinois. And this started off, it was a student project, and then it turned into a clean energy project that they were able to fund with money from DOE's Renew America's Schools program. And they're realizing the benefits of clean air for the students, the drivers, and the community. And they've updated their vehicle to grid technology, so they're able to put energy back on the grid from the school buses, which are only running a fraction of the time. And they're saving $30,000 a year. So that's money that can go back into the kids in the school. Next. And this last one is from a project here in St. Louis. This was funded through a private foundation that paid for charging infrastructure and vehicles to deliver people and services for a community centers, youth and senior service program. And these were installed in a neighborhood that is not talking about climate change every day, but definitely feeling the effects. And so this helped them to upgrade their fleet, which they were going to have to do anyway, and put in the infrastructure that is helping clean the air quality right there in their neighborhood. And it's also demonstrating to their clients in the community what's possible. Next. And so just in closing, I just want to say that, I know how overwhelming it can be to lead an organization or a program, and there's never enough capacity. And even when you get the money, it's often restricted. It doesn't pay for the staff that you need to do the additional work that you've been funded to take on. But, and getting more money takes money. So while there are systemic shifts that are needed to fix these long-term issues, we can work together now, take advantage of the opportunities in front of us to lighten or shift that load. Nonprofits and government agencies often offer these cohort learning experiences. And yes, they do take some time out of your day, but you often end up with information that would have taken you days to find out on your own anyway. Many of these funding agencies have newsletters. They post to social media when they have an opportunity available. And again, it can be overwhelming. You don't have to read them all. But again, think about what are those key priorities, where are those intersections for your organization, and skim through them and really highlight those. There are also other people who are sifting through these for you. So like I do this for the Midwest as best as I can, and I host a federal funding Friday each week, and we hop on and we share about grants and toolkits so that we're learning these things together and we don't have to handle all of this on our own. And even if there's not an opportunity, with your local community foundation or family foundation, right now, still look them up, get to know them, let them get to know you. Many of us in the nonprofit world are not familiar with finance topics, so we tend to avoid things that might say loan or financing vehicles. I think we're more comfortable trying to convince people of the merits of our work through a competitive grant sometimes than understanding interest rates. But these programs can also unlock all sorts of funding, and there's all sorts of other services that come with them. So you don't have to design and execute a project on your own. So, community development finance institutions, your local banks, be talking with them as well. So my last slide, I just want to say, we're not alone in this work. You can find me at the Midwest Climate Collaborative, and I look forward to answering any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. I think that was a really great overview of challenges, capacity, so much more. And I think that was a really great transition as well to our final panelist of the day from the Mid-America Regional Council. This speaker is a little bit unique in that they are a recipient of the Renew America's Nonprofits grant that was opened last year. And I'm going to hand it off to you two.
Great, thank you very much, Anna, and thank you to the Department of Energy for both the support you've given our community with the grant, as well as allowing us to share some perspective on the webinar today. Next slide. And Erin and I are going to kind of tag team this. Just a bit of background. Our organization is, I think I mentioned, an association of city and county governments. We serve a bi-state area, portions of Missouri and Kansas along the state line. We are a public nonprofit, but in 2005, we formed a 501c3 to allow us to raise additional dollars from both federal sources as well as philanthropy. And we have a long track record of serving the community, working with nonprofits, in particular to support disadvantaged populations. We're the Head Start grantee and work with lots of organizations to serve about 2,400 children and their families. We're the Area Agency on Aging, and so in a lot of different ways, we're supporting disadvantaged populations in our metro area. And then we have a partnership with a regional environmental group, Climate Action KC, and they're building energy exchange to really look at high performing buildings and how we really change the region in terms of being more energy efficient and sustainable. Next slide. Erin, I think, is going to tell you a little bit about the grant that we're kicking off.
So I'm working on the Renew America's Nonprofits grant, and it's basically set up to provide some upgrades for energy efficiency for nonprofits, so that they can reallocate that money toward serving their mission. We're planning to serve about 25 to 30 nonprofit organizations. We received the funding from the DOE of $4.7 million, and then we sought out and found $1.5 million in private foundation support to go along with that. And throughout this, the application for the grant as a prime recipient, we had several partners that also continue to help us with the execution of the grant. We partnered for community outreach with Community Capital Capital Fund and United Way of Greater Kansas City. We had initially anticipated getting about 50 applications for this grant, and we received close to 70. So the outreach was really good, and we're really fortunate to receive that additional support. We also have partnered for some additional nonprofit expertise with Climate Action KC and Building Energy Exchange KC, as well as Metropolitan Energy Center. They'll also be helping us do some of the energy assessments. And then we have 2 local engineering firms that are going to help us with the energy assessments, the level 1, level 2 audits, and then the design and then into construction and construction management. We anticipate, the upgrades for these are going to be, HVAC upgrades. We're going to be commissioning some of the existing HVAC units, doing monitoring and controlling services or devices, upgrading windows and doors, insulation, some minor building envelope improvements, and LED lighting. So the scope isn't huge, but we're anticipating about $200,000 per nonprofit, and we're looking at a 15% energy improvement after the improvements are done. And we'll be monitoring and tracking the 12-month prior energy usage, as well as the energy usage after the improvements are complete. And by tracking this, we're hoping to provide case studies for additional for future grant opportunities, so that we can show to foundations in our area that the dollars that they're giving us are having a direct impact on the community that they live in, and also to partner with those nonprofits and maybe get a few examples of how much of an impact that had and how many additional people were they able to serve with these energy improvements. Back to you, Marlene.
Okay, next slide. So, what started our work in this area toward securing this grant was really our history of addressing important community issues, working with community partners. Heather mentioned the importance of that. And like Coral mentioned, we serve as a re-grantor organization in a lot of ways. Our annual budget this year is $133 million, and about 75% of that we bring in and we pass right out to local governments, nonprofit organizations, school districts, and other community institutions, working with them to ensure that programs and services in the community are well designed and delivered well. And then we have strong fiscal capacity that gives our funders comfort that the dollars will be spent as intended and spent well. Next slide. And so what we have found over time in approaching and working with foundations is really to, again, as I think Heather mentioned, sort of aligning your work with the mission and the interests of foundations. We've built relationships and have built trust, and that has really been important. So we have a track record of performance. When COVID first hit and the pandemic caused lots of agencies to close and lots of people in the community to lose their jobs and their livelihood, we worked with the United Way, the Community Foundation, and LISC, and raised over $25 million in a matter of a few weeks. And we were able to work with numerous foundations and funders, and then re-granted those dollars out to over 400 nonprofit organizations in our community. And what was helpful about that experience was it showed to a lot of our foundations who had previously just funded the larger, more established nonprofits, is that some of the most important work in serving disadvantaged people in our communities is done by grassroots organizations. And so there became more of a focus on trust-based philanthropy in our community, and has served us all well as sort of a result of that experience. And then again, sort of our experience in seeking and utilizing federal funds has given some confidence by the funders that we're going to not only deliver what we say. Next slide. And so in addition to those strong relationships and sort of demonstrating our ability and gaining their confidence to deliver, we approached 4 foundations with whom we had prior relationships, and we knew they had an interest in supporting nonprofits that serve disadvantaged residents and communities. And so our pitch to them was, while it was about energy efficiency, it was really more about helping nonprofits in our community reduce their operating costs and put dollars into direct services. So many foundations are really interested in improving the capacity of nonprofits to serve their clients and the community. And so helping them see that this program really was about that. Some of the benefits that Heather mentioned, we talked a lot about making buildings healthier and more comfortable for both employees of the nonprofits, but also of clients that are being served. And what we heard from many of the nonprofits is that many of the clients they serve have faced trauma, have mental health challenges, have just stress from daily life. And so being able to come and receive services in a healthy and comfortable environment was really important to the delivery of services and the outcomes that the nonprofits would see in serving those clients. And then what foundations found helpful is seeing their dollars leveraged with the federal funds, with other foundation resources, and with the nonprofit support going into the program. Next slide. And one of the things we also observed as we've started to review these 70 applications that Erin mentioned is that many of them have already received some funding in the past, capital dollars to help them with solar panel systems, with HVAC replacements and other improvements. And again, they were making the case for the long-term benefit that these investments would have in their ability to serve the community. And so sort of stressing that long-term benefit, particularly as energy costs are going to continue to rise and climate is going to impact our community, and I'm sure yours, in terms of needing to address hotter summers and colder winters. And so this program really encourages those nonprofits that are assisted to focus on efficiency investments. Certainly we want to demonstrate energy savings. That's a big part of the grant, but we also want to see better outcomes for the community. And there's a real emphasis in our program around Justice 40 communities and populations. We're hoping to promote and support workforce development for area residents and to utilize small and disadvantaged businesses as part of our workforce. And then important to DOE, but also to us and to our foundations, is being able to measure the results and to demonstrate effectiveness. Next slide. So with that, we have some information on our website. We're happy to, we'll look forward in the few minutes we have left for any questions, but certainly can follow up later with any of you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. We can move on to the next slide and get into questions. I love seeing how active the chat has been throughout this, a lot of resource sharing, and that's really great to see. I know a lot of questions have been answered, I feel like, as we've spoken, so if people want to re-put in their questions and bring them towards the bottom, that would be helpful. To highlight a couple tools, I know Catherine a while back mentioned providing a list of different funding options for nonprofits to research. And I'm curious if any of you all have places where you find lists of funding options. We provide a newsletter that provides federal funding opportunities for nonprofits, but if there's any that go beyond that you would recommend.
I'll share a couple. I dropped one in the chat. It's called the Afford tool. I'll drop it in there again. Actually, maybe it has, and maybe now they're calling it something else, but it's put out by RMI, part of the American Cities Climate Challenge. And I think this one, you can put in there what kind of entity you are, what type of project you're looking for, funding type, what phase, and it'll tell you right away, what are the deadlines? Is there a match? Who are eligible entities? And then it's as easy as shopping for a cell phone. You can select 3 or 4 of them and it'll match them up against one another and you can see which one you'd like to go for. And then the other one, actually, the University of Michigan has a really good tool. Let me pull this up. It's a list and they break it down. They've got the incentives in here as well as they're tracking opportunities as they come out. So this is just a Google spreadsheet and I will copy this one and also drop it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Heather. And I know I saw someone a while back drop in the tool, the Desire tool, which we also think is incredible to see about the incentives by state and by region because we know it is so regional. And I'll put that link back in the chat as well. So there's a couple questions about DOE support and federal funds, and we will provide a link to sign up for our email. And I feel like that's the best way. Our newsletter every month provides resources for federal funds and all things TA specific for nonprofits. I also see some questions about tax credits and where to get the best information on that. I know a lot of resources have been shared, but if any of our panelists have like their go-to ones that they'd want to talk about, because I know that's a big barrier and new for the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, I know a really good TA provider in the space right now for the tax credits that nonprofits are newly eligible for is Lawyers for Good Government. They have put together a lot of resources. I saw some of them in the chat, and they're starting a kind of clean energy tax hub as well that I think somebody included in the chat here as well, where they're sharing all their learnings and examples that they have to projects or to folks who are considering applying for tax credits and kind of helping walk through the process. Would be probably a good place to start.
Thank you. There's a question early on, and I kind of hope we touched on it, but someone was asking, they were saying that Arkansas will probably not participate in the IRA, and they're wondering if their nonprofit can access the IRA funds. And we want to make that very clear that you can. I don't know if any panelist wants to expand on how nonprofits can directly access IRA, but.
I mean, I'll just share, IRA just refers to this piece of legislation, which has a whole bunch of different programs and funds through various agencies. So yes, definitely these different trackers, these spreadsheets and these websites we've been sharing are great ways to kind of sort through, as a nonprofit, what are you eligible for? Some of these grants are going straight to local governments or state governments, but there are a lot of them that are going straight to nonprofits for that very reason. If you're in a state that may not be going after some of these funds, it does not lock you out of these opportunities. So just look for those eligible entities. That's what you want to look for. And that'll open up the door for you.
Thank you. I think in the final minute, if we can go to the next slide and just again make a nod to the upcoming webinars, which will focus more on diverse funding mechanisms for nonprofits, utility rebates and incentives, and then lenders and investment stacking with more to come. You can look for that on our email list and on our website. And then next slide. Like I said, this is all being recorded. We will share all of these slides. And on these slides, you can find links. On this slide, there's a link to sign up for our newsletter and a link to where we want to hear more from you. A quick survey, this idea or the next idea on utility incentives is actually something that a nonprofit responded and to this survey and where we have gotten this inspiration from. So we'd love to hear from you, how we can best support you. Yeah, I'm seeing lots more questions in the chat. Okay, I think we will have to wrap up today. The series will keep going. Thank you so much for everyone coming. We really appreciate your participation. Thank you again for our panelists. It was really great for you all to be with us to kick off this first series, this webinar in this first webinar in the series. And we look forward to hearing more from all these participants and the survey that we'll send out. It'll be posted on our website in the next week. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Sorry I talked too long.
It was great. And for
It went